Well, happy darn CultureCast Day and Friday Junior. Welcome, welcome, Elaine Lin Hering. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am so excellent. And I'm just fired up that I get to start the top of my weekend
Mm,
having a conversation with you today
mm.
about having conversations, quite frankly. I
Yes.
mean, yes. Everyone, please welcome Elaine Lin Hering, who is the author of a book that just came out a few months ago, Unlearning Silence: How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully. But before we jump into this, we were talking about this backstage, so I can't help but move to the music, right?
Mm,
Like, I'm super excited about that. And I always want to do a shout out to a dear family friend, Julius Wilder, who is a producer here in Nashville, who put that tune together based on the energy of the
mhm,
leaders that I've had the chance to meet with, like you, who will help others who are listening in, watching in on how do you cultivate environments where everyone can thrive and be their
mhm,
full selves. And so I am super fortunate to have met you and super excited to talk about some of the key insights and lessons from your book. Before we jump into it, though, I do want to get into who's Elaine. Like, you
mm.
have such a diverse background, and then before like even your career, like, who was Elaine, young Elaine, growing up, and what led you to this career path, this amazing diverse career path you've had before you
Mm.
even wrote a book? Let's hear that.
Did you see that big sigh when you said delay?
Yeah.
Because that is the question, is it
Is
not?
it? Yeah, it
As
always
we're
is.
going along life, even the luxury or the opportunity to pause and say, "Well, hold on. Beyond the things I've done, the sort of stops I've taken, the roles I inhabit, who am I?"
Yeah,
I keep going back to I'm a human being,
I love that.
and I don't say that lightly because I think anytime you hold certain titles or have gone to certain schools or do certain things in the world, people actually forget that you're human. I forget that I'm human. I have these expectations of continuing to run and do rather than, "Hold on, I'm a human being, not a robot.
Yeah.
I am a human being, therefore I am also flawed and imperfect and in progress and learning." I was born in Taipei, Taiwan, and moved to California when I was 10 months old.
Oh,
I
wow.
was the model minority myth incarnate, like, straight A student, played piano. I was the one that all the aunties said to their kids, "Can you be more like Elaine?" And that's really confusing as a child, as a teenager to wonder, do I do these things because 'cause they're actually me or because it's the expectation?
Yeah.
And, I went to this little school called Harvard Law School and ended up teaching
So
there, and
tiny.
tiny. There's all these expectations and associations and assumptions about who you are based on
Mhm.
that, but I go back to being human, and it feels very much like, well, what am I learning? What am I discovering? How do I make the best decision based on the information I have today? How do I continue to put one foot in front of the other to take the next step? Is actually how I call myself an accidental author. It's how I ended up being an author, ended up talking about silence was really, what am I noticing? What am I learning? And what seems to be missing
Yeah.
that might be useful to add?
I love that. Actually, you and I did not have the chance to talk about this. There's so many parallels. I think
Mm.
growing up, I was born and raised in Southern California to immigrants from the Philippines.
Mhm.
And the same stereotypical how they raised me in this land of opportunity, go and get it, and be successful. Education was important,
Mm.
get straight A's. I
Mhm.
also learned how to play the piano.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
actually felt like my parents kind of forced me to do it, but I'm grateful now looking back because I
Yeah.
think that also unlocked creativity and discipline at the same
Mhm.
time,
Mhm.
as a young child going into
Mhm.
adolescence. Um, and I feel you when you say that. And I love that you say who is Elaine? Well, you are human. And I agree with you. I actually just spent time with a group of high potential leaders across Fortune 1000 companies. And in my parting words with them, the comment that I made, because they're all like poised to take that next step into the C suite. And that's why they're there.
Yeah.
And the kind of the parting comments that I made before I left was, you are not a title.
Mhm.
You are,
Mhm.
figure out who you are and
Yeah.
what you stand for and what your calling is, which is
Yeah.
why I think you and I were destined to meet. And I
Mm.
think about your background, it screams initially, again, just outside looking in, okay, so you're following like this law path. Are you going
Mhm.
to be a lawyer? And
Mhm.
then you kind of I'll use broadly the word communication as a vehicle, at least at my
Yeah.
assessment of your background and your career,
Yeah.
as a vehicle to really drive your own path. So
Mm.
while that could be at the center of what you've done, either interning or initially coming out of Harvard, um, curious how that went. And I also believe that I, like you, have been an observer of human behavior my
Yeah.
entire life, and that's
Yeah.
kind of what's driven you to what you're doing.
Totally. I was that precocious 11-year-old that said, "I wanna be a lawyer." And so I went down that path in a really structured way.
Uh-huh.
And then when I got to Harvard Law School as a student, I came across getting to yes, sort of classic interest-based negotiation technique. I learned a really expensive lesson that emotions are something that are legitimate, that you can talk about. That was not true. That was not a lesson present in my family of origin.
Oh,
We
wow.
didn't emotional intelligence, it was all about survival, right? All about doing better than where we came from on a pretty linear path with clear criteria. So, it was a light bulb moment that I'm so grateful for of, "Oh, emotions are a thing." We can talk about mental health, we can talk about relational health, any of those
Yes.
things. We didn't know what to do with them, and there's no blame on my parents or their generation, it just wasn't part of the conversation at that point in time, and so that opened my eyes to, "Wait, we can talk about things?"
Yeah,
And this question of other than sue each other and blow each other up, what could we do?
I love that.
Turns out a lot, right?
Yeah, again, it's interesting, all roads lead to where you came from initially, and same, I think my parents substitute doctor for lawyer,
Yeah.
growing up, and
Yeah.
definitely a linear path. And I remember early on having a conversation with my mom about something. I was upset about something, and and this is again loving mom, that she was also very
Mhm,
strict and disciplined. Like, feelings, you're not supposed to have feelings. Like, just go and get this done. And that was not for lack of love. I think that was just, to your point, survival
mhm,
and
mhm.
getting along. And that's why I'm so excited to chat with you about finding your own voice, right? And then
Mm,
in doing so, how do you help others find theirs?
mhm,
And it's interesting hearing about your childhood and going through law school and unlocking that idea that, hey, emotions are involved, you
mhm,
know, and
mhm.
it is not one dimensional. Like, there's so much to be open to, I guess. And
There's so
so,
much to be
yeah,
open to and so much for us to learn, and I
yes,
often think back from a pragmatic standpoint of, well, that was a lot of tuition to pay for that lesson. But if
yeah,
we look at our lives, I think every step teaches you something, reveals something. You learn something that you wouldn't otherwise have learned. And, that step taught me how to communicate more effectively and also opened up. I'm chuckling that you were doctor path, I was lawyer path. Those were sort of the options. I didn't
or
know
engineer, yeah,
or engineer, but I was
yeah,
not good at hard science. So that was actually not an option for me. And how much I wouldn't have ever known about this industry, this field, this profession of leadership development
yeah,
had I not gone down that path, right? So often we obsess about what is the right step to take. versus what is a next step that will reveal something to us, and how do we continue to learn from that. That to me, fueled with the curiosity and the openness to evolve, has been really both key and makes for a much more interesting life.
Yeah, I love that. It is about learning. And I love what you just said too. It's not about what is the full pathway, but really
Mhm,
what is the next step, right? And it's okay to not have that fully mapped out. And I agree with you. I think I've been around the block long enough in life where I don't think anything's ever really a linear path,
no.
right? And in order to serve yourself and
Mhm,
create a full life, as part of your title, it is about what are the lessons learned and how do you take those
mhm,
lessons learned, the things that happen in your life for you, right?
mm,
And how do you take that to inform in your heart and in your gut, kind of what's next for you? And
yeah.
I'm curious when you stepped into this pathway of, okay, I'm going to become a lawyer. And then what was it that happened that you kind of went, you know what? No, I'm going to
Mhm,
venture into this consulting, this
mm.
leadership development, communication. Like what was that lesson learned, I guess?
Yeah, I was a summer associate at a big law firm in DC, and I worked a 13-hour day staring at a computer, not interacting with another human being. And I thought, "Ooh, this is not for me. This feels deadening to my soul." And I feel locked into this path because it's the one I said I wanted to. It's sunk cost
Mm,
fallacy, right? I
yeah,
This is what I was gonna do. If I wasn't gonna do it, what was I going to do instead? Simultaneously, was part of the teaching team in Harvard Executive Education, teaching negotiation skills, and it was still a 13-hour day, but it was life-giving. It was
yeah.
energizing. I felt the impact. I thought, "This is something I think I could be good at." And I was also told at the time, you can't really get into this field unless you're a white male, have 10 years of experience, and a head of gray hair.
I mean, what's up with that?
It's not untrue for circles, many circles of leadership.
Or generally, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so I sort of resigned myself, I'll go to big law, I'll pay off my debt, that seems fine while I figure out the
yeah.
rest. And part of continuing to show up is also seeing what opportunities present themselves. So I was I had resigned myself to go to the law firm and
Hmm.
go down that path, and then an email popped up, one day in my inbox saying, "You're shortlisted for a job in Australia, teaching negotiation and mediation at Monash Law School and doing consulting work around communication, in the region, so Asia Pac." And I thought, "Well, this sounds interesting." And we interviewed by Skype because Zoom didn't exist yet.
Yeah,
They made me an offer. I went out there for a year, and it was an opportunity to test this hypothesis of,
yeah.
I think I'm interested in this work. I think I have skill sets. I think I might be able to make a living. All of those things turned out to be true, and I never looked back.
That's amazing. How did they even find you?
Connections
I
of
love
people
it.
who who do you know, and how are you showing up? And what I love about that story is that it taught me that things are brewing even when we can't see them happening.
That's right.
And as someone who wants to know and likes to be in control and would like a plan, and this is the beauty or the allure of a linear plan or a linear life, is you at
Yeah.
least know where you're going. That's deeply uncomfortable because I wanna know. But do I really?
Yeah.
There's a how fun is it? What else might be next? There's a curiosity that comes with not knowing everything.
Yeah, I love this. These words are a theme, right? It's
Mm,
learning, it's
yeah.
curiosity, it's being open. And also this notion of, I, it- I think about in mentoring people because they're so quick to say, I want to move up in my career, whatever it is that they've chosen. And
Mhm,
being present in the moment in what it is that you're doing and paying attention to all around you. So that curiosity, I'll use your word, and being open because
mhm.
you're right. Things are brewing around you, right? I'm a big believer in the energy. If you're not like fully open to receiving it, right,
Mhm.
you may miss again opportunities you're not aware of
Yeah,
because you're so focused on this path, but
yeah,
this linear path that you feel like I'm compelled to do because of the self pressure that you put on yourself, or maybe family. I mean,
yeah,
being Asian American,
yeah,
I think about that pressure
yeah.
of I don't know if I asked you about this, but I know for me, like, we had three different languages in our home. My
Mm,
parents spoke both Tagalog and Ilocano, but also
mm,
spoke my mom spoke Spanish. We had a woman who lived with us during the week who solamente hablaba español. She only spoke
mm.
Spanish. But then leaving the house, especially to go to school, like for me, kindergarten and on, my mom and dad, my mom especially would say, only speak English because
Yeah.
we want people to treat you fairly. So kind of a early lesson learned, as a child. And I don't
Mhm.
know, that alone is pressure. If I think about it back then, to be
It
a certain way.
it's total pressure, and I would say it's pressure on the wrong party,
Hmm.
because why would we not treat someone well or the same because of the language they speak or how they speak a dominant language? That's not on you as a kindergartner. That's on everyone else of how they choose to show up. And that's the opportunity that we have in
Hmm.
the teams that we lead and the people that we interact with. I'm still thinking of your comment to that leadership cohort trying to get into the C suite,
Yeah.
that success is achieving that title. And it takes me to the best advice that someone gave me, which is you have to define success for yourself. Otherwise, every other metric is there, right? Why do you want that title? Do you even want
Exactly.
that role? Do you know what comes with it? Is it the life you want to live, or is it sunk costs or expectations? Is it prestige? Any of those things I think are okay so long as you're clear
Yeah.
that it's what you want and that is your definition of a life well lived.
I totally agree with you. And I think when I tried to part with them, and I had a talk with them to kick off the whole meeting in this last week, it is about getting clear about who you are, what you stand for, what motivates you, what is your life calling. And
Mm,
that is really, I'd say, the compass, right? Because you can't
mhm.
map all that out. Some of that is like life will present opportunities that you don't even know about,
Yeah.
right? But so as long as you know I'll use the word measure. It sounds like
Mm,
too judgy, but are you measuring that against what you set for yourself, right? Like, what is your life calling, and are you living it? And
good.
that's a question, not life success is this title. And I think about, I've made that transition of having worked in corporate life, and I think you and I have kind of had that
Mhm.
same journey too. And how so many people that I met, even leaving, they would just say, "Who are you? What do you do? And who are you with?" And it's kind of like,
Yeah.
I'm with myself. Hello, my name is Marisa, and I am a
Yeah.
kindness catalyst. Who are
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. I love that that is your response. Um, it's I wanna sort of embrace this with compassion, right? Because it goes back to the questions that we ask. It goes back to the forms that we fill out when we're registering to go to a
yeah,
program or a conference. If we are truly to be more than the title, then how do we also change the systems, the forms, the structures around us to
yes.
signal rather than reinforce that you are the title in the company you work for?
Yeah, that is I hear you. I think that is a much broader question.
Mhm.
And I think this whole window has opened up since, I don't know how many disruptions we've had since the pandemic,
Mm,
but you think about what the pandemic broadly opened up for leaders, and I'll use your word again, is that they realize, especially in these large corporations and small companies, that at the center of all of this are human beings, you know, as the
I love that you're
engine.
giving people credit to say people
Yeah,
realize that. I think there are some
Yeah,
leaders who are still fighting that reality and trying
yeah,
to act as if we are not, or that our humanity is a disruption, is an annoyance. I would love for us as a matter of culture to get to at the core of this are people and some of the friction that we continue to experience, whether it's work from home or any of these
yeah,
policies, get to not having that assumption at the core of it. So
yeah,
let's fast
yeah.
forward to your version of reality because I like it better.
I know. I think it's really about for a minute, right? And you're right. I think things have reverted. But
Mhm,
for a minute, we were all forced to examine that because
mhm,
we were all in this cloudy, muddy area, everyone living and learning our way through it and surviving on our own. And then if we were responsible and it, as part of companies, working our way through companies, yeah, you can't help but know that
mhm,
there are humans at the center of this. And
mhm,
how do we create that environment where people still feel like they know what they have control over
yeah,
and can build some level of resilience as
mm,
we work our way through this. And yeah,
mm,
maybe I'm being super optimistic. I think at that moment, it was like, yikes, we've got to figure this out. But to
totally,
your point,
totally.
how have we gone back? Right? Like, it's like here we are a few years later, and the
Yes.
systems, the environment, the culture
Yeah,
generally is still back to these things
yeah,
that
which
are,
takes
yeah,
us to this question of voice,
that's
because
right.
when you're talking about who am I? What do I care about? Am I living in alignment with my values? To me, that is the essence of voice. Voice isn't just the words that you say in a meeting, voice is how you move through the world. So
Yes.
much like a company has values, do we have our own personal values defined that we can measure against? I think measure isn't a judgment, measure is a guidepost.
Yeah.
You know, these values are guideposts as the pressures of culture around us, the forms that we fill out, the people around us operate in a different way. Do I have something to hang my hat onto, to look to? Call it a North Star, call it a compass,
Yes.
whatever tool you want to use it. But to me, that's what personal values are. Am I living how I intend? Because most of the time, the world around me doesn't really want me to think for myself as a matter of a company, like having
Yeah.
someone perform that role full alignment with the company rather than themselves, that agency to have a voice of your own, to live as you intend rather than, our families intend, our
Yes.
spouses intend. Culture would want us in whatever perceived, visible, non-visible identities they see of us, expect us to
Yes.
show up. And that culture really is just the collection of norms. So as
Yep.
we show up in alignment with our own values, the ripple effect of how that actually changes norms over time as well. That
Yeah.
gives me hope.
Yeah, I love it. I love that, I typically ask, how do you define culture? And I love how
Mm,
you just nailed it and said it's a collection of norms, and how you show up also creates a norm and continues to help shape and evolve what that culture is that you're creating in that being, that body, that organization. And I also love, and I guess we could jump into really what got you on this pathway to writing your book. And I love this word, having agency or
mhm,
giving agency,
mm,
where people feel like it's not only clarity about, who you are, what you care about, what you
yeah,
want in the world, but having the free will and the confidence, to act on that, to
mm,
declare, right?
mm,
And then how do you help others do that? So
yeah,
say more about that. And also let's talk about, okay, what got you into this whole book writing? Because
yeah.
it's amazing, the lessons learned reading the book. Yeah.
Yeah, I am too close to the project to say whether I would ever wish book writing on anyone. And also so grateful for the
Yeah.
opportunity and, to share this idea. I never intended to write a book. There were so many negotiation communication books out there that it felt like sort of regurgitated the same thing over and over, slap a different cover on it.
Mhm.
And I always said, I'm not going to write anything unless I have something to add. And as I coached people, worked with teams on communication and conflict management, this tension of how do I speak up kept rearing its head, and of course is a question that I have personal interest in because I was always told to speak up more, right? Speak up more clearly,
Yes.
you need to be heard, use your voice. And it's like, well, I did, and then I got slapped down, or I did
Mhm.
and it didn't go well. So it seems more complex than Nike, just do it, just speak your mind.
Mhm.
What is it? It was also in parallel of teaching people negotiation skills, difficult conversation skills, feedback out of the Harvard Negotiation Project,
Mhm.
believing that those frameworks are sound, but some people still wouldn't negotiate. Some people still wouldn't
Interesting.
have the difficult conversations. Some people still wouldn't give or receive feedback, no matter how much HR or their manager told them they needed to.
Yeah.
Why is that? And to me, the answer is silence. The silence we've learned of when we bite our tongue to keep the peace, when we don't say something in order to not rock the boat, and how
Mhm.
often at work we're rewarded for staying silent because, then we can leave the meeting. Then the leader thinks things are fine until they find out later that they're not, and we haven't had a chance to course correct and all of that. But I may not be around
Yeah.
anymore at that point. So, in what ways have we learned to stay silent? In what ways do the leaders, even well intentioned leaders around us, actually silence us, tell us explicitly or implicitly, stay in line, edit out that part of yourself, saying, I want feedback, but then acting in the moment, getting defensive, which actually tells me you don't really want it, or at least that's,
Right?
I get it. And then, of course, silence being baked into the systems. So, all of that to me was I think we're asking the wrong question. We're asking women, people of color, anyone who's soft spoken to just speak up. Or the answer is have more confidence. You need to go to assertiveness training. But by the way, don't be too assertive. We can't get to a useful answer if we're asking the wrong question.
Oh
To me,
my
the
goodness.
question is not just how do you speak up? It is what gets in the way of speaking up. And it is what role does silence play in our teams? And what role do I play in perpetuating either a culture of silence or creating a culture of voice where we have that
Yeah.
agency? Because the difference between silence that is additive or strategic and silence that is negative or at times oppressive is agency. Do
Yeah.
I get to choose when, where, and how I want to use my voice? It also, to me, is not a speaking up is not a confidence thing or a courage thing, even though courage and confidence are both useful or
Yeah.
helpful.
Yep.
Whether I speak up, whether I use my voice, whether I bring my best ideas, my best talent to work is a calculation. Often it's a subconscious calculation. But if it does not seem like you're going to be receptive to my ideas, to my insights, if you're not going to appreciate my best effort, then why would I bring my best self?
I hear you. Yeah. No, there's so much that I can relate to personally, and also having supported teams in my lifetime where there is that stereotypical, again, young female person of color growing up in my career.
Mhm.
And I think about the early coachings
Mm,
from my leaders, which is around, hey, in that meeting, gosh, you should speak up or say more, right? Like you should say
mhm,
more. Now, I've had leaders who've also said, because when you do, we learn from it, right? Not just
mhm.
go and say more.
Right.
And then, and I've gotten the coaching on both ways. Be more
Yeah.
assertive. Don't be so assertive, you know? And it's to the point where I'm still going to use your words of curiosity and openness
Mm,
that if the environment, the culture, the norms that we're talking about are the people around you are really in that state of curiosity
mhm,
and feeling that there's openness to hearing it all or different ideas, then I think that I love what you said too around it's a calculation to whether or not you choose to use your voice, choose to declare, because it's all about well, what the heck is happening around me and how effective is that going to be, even if I
Mhm,
have a strong point of view or a
mhm,
point of view on something?
mhm.
So
And the costs
interesting.
are
Yeah.
real, right? The costs are real and incurred by me. The the huge thing about it being a question of calculation is that as leaders or as colleagues, we can actually change the calculus for each other. If I knew that when I spoke up, when I shared my point of view, when I shared my perspective, my colleague was going to appreciate that I did it,
Yeah.
celebrate that I did it. My manager was going to reward me. They were going to say, wow, that was really useful. I learned
Yeah.
so much, or I hadn't considered that. Thank you. How different my calculation of the risk analysis, the cost benefit analysis would
Yeah.
be. It gives us more leverage to create a different culture rather than you need to go fix yourself. But by the way, if it goes back to agency, right?
Yeah.
Because if the goalpost is someone else's metric for effective communication or assertiveness or being heard, the goalpost changes. And
Hmm.
we've all experienced that, right? I think I'm being direct, and now you're saying now I'm being too direct. Versus how do we lower the risks for people sharing their perspective, reduce the barriers to entry in the conversation? That's
Yes.
something that we can each do for each other.
So I guess that's a good question that I have. It's, let's say people are starting on this pathway and they're working in a culture and environment where maybe they feel like they are silenced.
Mhm,
How do they start? I hear you on the, there's not a formula, but I think it's steps at a time. But how do they
mm,
start creating agency for themselves and then
mm.
therefore for others? What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
There's the micro and then there's the macro. And we've
Yep.
talked a bit about the macro
Yeah.
of actually your own personal values, what is success, what is impact, what do you want in life? That is all grounding and often gives us the bigger why as to why we might even speak up in a meeting. At a very macro level, if you're testing the waters of how do I even interject in a conversation
Yeah.
when it feels like everybody else's needs, priorities, voices suck up all the energy, and I don't want to add to the cacophony. Right? My
Yeah.
favorite entryway phrase is from where I sit. From where I
Oh,
sit, that doesn't make sense. From where I sit, I don't see how the pieces of that strategy fit together. From where I sit, it doesn't seem like we have enough resources. The beauty of from where I sit is it acknowledges that your own point of view is legitimate and limited. Right? There's a from where I
yeah.
sit. This is what I think. What do things look like from where you sit? Because it's going to be different. So often, particularly thoughtful people are like,
Yeah.
"Well, I don't know everything, so I can't say it. I'm not the subject matter expert in the room,"
Yeah.
versus, "Well, you see a slice of the world, and
That's
that
right.
is a valuable perspective, so let's add it together and together have a more complete data set."
That is such a great entry point. I love that from where I sit
Mhm.
because only you have that knowledge and experience, your perspective that is missing when you don't bring it up, right?
Mhm.
And so I
Mhm.
love that. I'm actually going to now practice that. I think about, especially having been in many meetings where everyone's getting in there and everyone's just
Yeah.
sharing a lot of information. And maybe it's because the roles that I have played in certain organizations. But to me, it's like, hey, here's based on what I'm hearing,
Mhm.
the themes that I see, right? Here's
Yeah.
what I think, although I do love this from where I sit. Here's what I think, or here's what I see,
Mhm.
XYZ. And I say that because
Yeah.
here's the data, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I think in doing that, and I love that simple from where I sit, also could give encouragement to others to then begin speaking in that way. Well,
Mhm.
well, Elaine just said from where she sits this, this perspective XYZ. So
Yeah.
then I'm going to get in there because mine might be a little different. And from where
Totally.
I sit. Oh,
Totally.
that's great.
And it's going to be different. right? It's going to be different based on our lived experience. It's going to be different on our job title. If I'm in sales, it's fundamentally different than marketing or engineering. And how often do we not talk with each other? And we
Yeah.
miss something that's important that could save us 6 months of spinning, or the things that blow up later, that we so often, when we doubt our own voice, and with good reason, right? Other people
Mhm.
are doubting us, positioning it as if we have imposter syndrome, all of those pieces. We doubt whether we have something valuable to offer. And we have what we have to offer, which is what we can see from our vantage point, and taking away the pressure of needing to see everything from our
Yeah,
vantage point, because no one can do that, right? You
that's
don't need a
right.
team if you could do that. So how do you bring what you have to offer?
That's amazing. Um, Question on that. What is the role of listening? Because I think
Mm,
about, and I'm sure you've been in these meetings too, and I've probably been one of those people. And so, what I mean by that is people not really listening, they're just thinking about what it is they're going to say next so that
yeah.
when there's an opening, they're going to say it versus really listening to what's
Mhm.
happening. So, talk about the role of listening in
Mm.
unsilencing.
I mean, we stay silent because it feels like other people aren't listening. If we knew that we would be heard, we would be seen, known, heard, valued, again, changes the calculation as to
Yeah,
whether I'm going to take the risk to say something, even if it doesn't come out perfectly, because someone else is curious and interested and sees the value in me rather than making me defend it. Listening is fundamental to creating a culture of voice, because why would you use your voice if you're not going to be heard?
that's right.
It feels futile. And that it is listening, not just nodding your head, not the perfunctory way, but listening to understand.
That's
And
right.
one of the ways that we silence each other is by our inability to listen across difference. I mean, not just listen across differences of perspective, because we as
Yeah,
human beings get defensive, but can I hear this point of view if it comes out of someone who looks and sounds different than I do, whose native language, this whole I can't speak, or I'm not going to be heard because your English is so broken. How many
yeah,
times has that been part of the narrative, and how much we as leaders miss out on
that's right.
perspective and end up living in a skewed sense of reality because we can't hear it from someone. So the fundamental leadership skill set for me is, can I listen across difference? Because if I require everyone to look and sound like me, or communicate to me in the very narrow way that is
Yeah,
native to me or plays to my strengths, that creates such barriers for everyone else.
totally. I love that idea of listening across difference. And it is about appreciating that. Well, first of all, it's understanding your own bias, right, from where you sit, but it's also being open
Mhm.
to just different experiences, different people. And I know that also has been like, I think about the role of equity and inclusion and diversity. Look, I've had 3 decades working in corporations. And how has
Mhm.
the conversation not evolved yet?
Mhm.
And it still goes back to,
Yeah.
and I'm going to get back to you, and I love that you say this because I also agree with you in that this human nature that people want to be seen and heard. Like if
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
core.
Mhm.
Right? And I think if can you create an environment around you or you as a human being, your own personal culture
Yeah.
where people around you feel like you are recognizing them. And when I say recognition, see them, hear them, value them, even celebrate them
Mhm.
for who it is, what they are, why they are, and what they
Mhm.
bring to the table. Like I think
Mhm.
that is a culture of unsilencing. It's a culture of when I think about belonging and inclusion.
Yeah.
Right? It's that. You've said this consistently around listening across differences, um, and truly seeing and hearing people.
Mhm.
for who they are, not what you think they should be,
Totally.
right?
And what might we learn
Yeah. And what
from
might we learn? Yes.
yeah, which is really hard to do when we essentially are operating on autopilot, right? Jumping from one thing to the next. We are doing reactive decision making rather than reflective decision making. We're doing quick thinking instead of slow thinking, right? Any of those
Yeah.
paradigms. And traditional advice around influencing, a lot of it advises people, if you want to be seen and heard, you need to, people are more likely to say yes to, want to work with, and want to help people who look and sound like them. So we as human beings will then self
Interesting.
segregate, but that actually gets in our own way. I mean, this is why it feels like diversity efforts are futile, or,
Yeah.
we're not, I'll find the research says diverse teams outperform, but I don't see that on my team. So let me just go back to what is familiar. It takes work. It takes
Yeah.
work to listen across difference. It is also the opportunity to A, honor someone's humanity, B,
Yeah.
build a culture, I would say a culture of voice, a culture where people can thrive, which
Yes.
then we can look at the bottom line and the outputs, and we know all the research around that. But it starts with, how do I want to show up? How am I treating someone else today? Which, we're all interconnected, impacts
Yes.
how much of themselves they bring to work, how much they offer of their talents, insights, self, energy, and life.
That's amazing. I agree with you. I think it is having the courage to actually hold a mirror up to yourself
Mm,
and get perspective on how how am I with others? I think about, I say this all the time too. We all grew up in grade school learning the golden rule, treat people the way you want to be
mhm,
treated.
mhm,
I always say let's level up and treat
mhm.
people the way they want to be treated, the
Yeah.
platinum rule.
Well,
And in order to do that, it's starting from a place of learning, right?
mhm,
And starting from a place of, yeah,
mhm.
you may even look like me or sound like me, whoever, right? And
Totally.
we learn this early on as kids. So, kids are mean. I think about this, at least
Yeah.
growing up, like when you look different, I'm going to just make fun of you and shut you down. At least that's my experience.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm,
but I think, you make me think about this platinum rule, which is treat people the way they want to be treated. And
mhm.
it's not quick. And what I mean by that, it's not like you're going to automatically know how it is they want to be treated. It's
Yeah.
going to take time to truly
Mhm,
see and hear someone, you
mm,
know, vibe with them, so to speak,
mhm,
before you truly know, like, wow. And it's
mm,
a process. It's not like a one quick step.
mhm. It's not a one quick step, and there are shortcuts to it,
Yeah.
right? We
Well,
typically figure out what works with people over time by trial and error, and in the trial and error, there's a lot of, hits to trust and painful sort of elbows
yeah.
bumping against each other, versus an explicit conversation of, "Hey, what makes it easiest for you to share your thoughts?
Yeah.
Are you a typer or are you a talker? Are you a real-time processor, or do you prefer asynchronous communication? Are you a post processor?" Right?
Yeah.
Those are shortcuts. What are your pet peeves around feedback? If I wanna offer you coaching, what's the best way to do that, right? These are all conversations we can have that
I
are
love that.
30-second conversations in a one-on-one that develop self-awareness,
Yes.
articulate what we know so that we're getting that intel and data to then be able to operationalize it, or at least better interpret your behavior of, oh, if you're silent in that meeting, it's not because you're disengaged or you're mad or
Yes.
you're checked out or you disagree, it's because you're thinking. What a novel idea, right? But I
Right?
can code your behavior better, or at
Yes.
least know to check in with you because we've talked about it. How do we make the things that we so often, as a matter of habit, don't discuss, actually discuss them, in your next one-on-one meeting?
Yes.
What are your pet peeves around feedback? Because I want to be supportive of you. I want to help you grow. What are you working on? How can I
Yeah.
support you? Like, any of these conversations, 30 seconds, 2
I
minutes,
love that.
and fundamentally changes the nature of the relationship, fundamentally changes the nature of the culture on your team, and ripple out from there, right? Each choice that we make matters.
Yeah. I love the shortcuts too. And it's not like, hey, it takes, well, it does take practice
Mhm.
and over time and repetition to get better every time that you do it. I also love the shortcuts on if you're a leader responsible for others on your team, having those quick conversations. And instead of having an assumption based on your own personal experience,
Yeah.
really understanding, decoding, so to speak, understanding
Mhm.
how to best support that person, right? If,
Yeah.
if you're a leader supporting an individual or leading an individual, what what is an environment where they feel the most successful or where they can thrive and contribute? I love that. Um, that's a great shortcut. And I would wonder what your thoughts are on, I think about my own personal development
Mm.
and having supported pretty large teams, but also with direct reports where, I've come back from a meeting where I felt like, wow, that didn't go well,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I have gone to my team to just, as a leader should, debrief, cascade what they're learning from an organization standpoint so that they can be effective in their jobs.
Yeah.
And I have found personally, like, it's also created that kind of open and more trusting communication with my own direct reports when I come back and say, yikes, this didn't go well for me in this meeting. Either you were in the meeting or you weren't. I would love your help. And
Mm.
I'd love some
Mm.
ideas that you might have
Mm.
on how I can be more effective representing us,
Mhm. Mhm.
making a better contribution on behalf of us. I think
Yeah.
about like the function that I represent in
Yeah.
this meeting. And
Yeah.
so I don't know what your thoughts are on that, on helping to unsilence.
Totally. I love that because just because 'cause we're not talking about it doesn't mean that the issue has gone away.
Yeah.
Right? Not talking about it, everybody knows that the meeting didn't go well, or
Yeah.
they hear about it and then you've lost control of the narrative. It also has set the tone and established a culture of silence where, oh, I guess we don't talk about things when they go poorly. We're just going to sweep it under the rug, or any other number of narratives. If we leave a vacuum in communication with our silence, other people fill in the story of what's going on, and usually not in the
Yeah.
right way,
It's not,
right?
yeah, it's
Not
not
in a
positive.
totally. So I love that move, particularly as a leader, because everybody knows. Then they're wondering, do you know? Do you have that self-awareness
Yeah.
to know that it didn't go well? Or are you thinking it went well? So you naming it didn't go well, or I don't think it went well, at least signals we can talk about this. I have some modicum of self-awareness.
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
inviting you into the process.
Yes.
And also, this is how you handle things when they do not go as well as you had hoped, right?
Yes.
So if things don't go as well as you'd hoped in your context, that ideally you would do the same thing, or at least I'm signaling for you it is okay
Yeah.
to say it did not go well versus pretending. I mean, how many teams have we been a part of where everyone pretends things are fine when
Oh, like,
everyone
oh, that
knows
was
it's not?
great. That was great. Right. Yeah. The emperor has no clothes.
Mhm,
Right.
mhm, mhm,
Yeah. I love that idea. And again, I'm going to reinforce the words you say too. Having that self awareness, creating that self awareness takes courage for yourself. Right.
mm,
So it's really about starting from that place
yeah,
of, are you self aware of how others experience you
mm,
and
mm,
how they want to experience you? Right. And how they want to be
mhm,
experienced.
mhm.
So that's, yeah.
Which
Go
is
ahead.
really the crux of what impact are you having?
Yeah.
So often as leaders, we judge ourselves based on our good intent, right? We judge ourselves on our intentions, and they're usually good, and
Yeah.
we may or may not be of the aware of the impact we're having on the people we lead and the people around us. And do we have the curiosity and the humility to ask, to be able to hear, to listen, even across difference, even if it
Yeah.
shakes and doesn't jive with the identity story we have for ourselves as good leaders. But that is also how we grow.
That's right.
It's
Yeah,
information. You can then figure out what to do with it, but if you don't have the information, you can't do anything about it. You're living in
yeah,
your own reality while
that's
everyone
right.
around you sort of suffers.
They suffer, and they also, you're living in your own reality.
Mhm.
They've created another reality about the
Yes.
leadership shadow that you've created. Um, oh, you made me think about another word. So self-awareness, but then I think the other piece that's critical to this too, that I'm hearing you say is you've got to have humility.
Mhm.
Like that, give yourself some grace and have your own personal courage to go, yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, maybe there is more for me to learn. And there always is. I mean,
Oh,
we're always in that constant learning, but the humility to do that
mhm.
versus ego.
Mhm. Also, to me, you don't lose anything by saying, "I have more to learn." If we don't start from why would there be any assumption that anyone knows everything or could do everything? I'm
Yeah.
not sure where that comes from other than this individualism, particularly in the United States, of rugged individualism. You could make it yourself, you could do it yourself. We're
Yeah.
all interconnected. I mean, there are no individual wins, even if they're positioned as individual wins, because there was a team
Yes.
effort behind it. And so, yeah, it's such a puzzle as to why humility would be seen as weakness,
Yeah.
or when really it says, "Okay, you're human, you're learning, and we can
That's
learn."
right. Yeah, I like the word too. Humility is actually, it's not a sign of weakness. It's about being human. And I
Mhm,
think that's more what leaders, actually, what employees today want from their leaders.
mm,
In that, we've reverted back to the non-human. You and I kind of talked about this, like after this massive pandemic,
yeah.
now, oh, what's AI going to do? I'll use that. That's like the
Mhm,
latest, right? AI, and that's going to help us become more efficient. But then the
mhm,
studies also show that, it's not going to help your employees become more efficient because they're going to burn out more quickly
mhm,
and this
mhm,
and create anxiety and agita in the workplace.
mhm,
It's only going to require leaders to develop for themselves and in their teams these social skills, these cognitive skills around being emotionally intelligent, like all the things that you're talking about.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
so you're helping me think about that out
mm,
loud on, okay, how
mhm.
do we then layer in with technology? How do we make sure that people have agency?
Yes, and again, asking the right question, great.
Yeah.
I can understand the value proposition of being more efficient. What about being more effective?
Yes.
And what does it require? What skill sets would we need to be effective? How are we measuring effectiveness? Which to me would include guarding against burnout, right? Remembering
Yes.
that we are human and having that humanity reflected in our policies, in our practices, in how we lead, and how we interact with one another.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other thing that you remind me of that I love as a step and wonder if it fits within this uncovering and learning from people. I've had team members who, they might own a certain
Mhm.
vertical within the function and they're like, we want to go off and do this. And of course,
Mm.
you've got to do all the homework on what problem we're trying to solve, et cetera. So we all align on that. But then what is the solution? And they come up with like, hey, here's a solution. And I always say, I love where you're going with this. Who else have you met with? And what else do
Mhm.
they, what can they
Mhm.
add to it? And so
Mhm.
I've always thought that it becomes a better product
Yeah,
as a result of asking that question.
yeah,
And they're like, you know what? I haven't thought about going to
yeah.
XYZ different people who have nothing to do with what I'm doing. Like
Mhm.
I'm not, they're not the experts at what I do. But I
Mhm.
also believe it becomes a better service or product because we opened it up, you
Yeah.
know? And yeah,
And there
go
can
ahead.
be a lot of reasons why we don't think to consult other
Yeah.
people, right? Everybody's already burned out, everyone's so tired, I don't wanna take up someone else's time or bandwidth. I hadn't thought, do I fundamentally value their perspective
Yeah.
And so there's a norming there, and it takes us back to culture. What culture are we creating of how we
Yeah.
work here? Do we work in silos? Do we value different perspective, right? The value of a layperson or value of a do we fundamentally value each other's perspectives? And what do our actions reveal about those values?
I love that. I think it, from a culture standpoint, are we creating a culture? Are we creating norms? Are we behaving in a way where
Mhm.
people feel that we value
Yeah.
who they are and what their perspective is? I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, I'm chuckling only because someone once asked me, "How do I help someone feel like I'm listening to them?" And I had a similar reaction, which is,
Wow. Okay.
how about actually listening to them? Right? Because
Yeah.
it's not just about how you make someone feel like you value them or their perspective. You can make them feel that by actually doing it.
Right. Actually listening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And before you even say anything, listening and actually saying, oh, it's to me, it's pretty simple. Have a conversation, ask the
Mhm.
question, what do you think? Or how do you feel?
Mhm.
Whatever the entry point is,
Mhm.
what is your point of view?
Yeah.
And actually, here's what I heard from you.
Mhm.
And here's what I think what you said, right? And think
Yeah.
about what you said. That's an easy hack, so to speak,
Mhm.
on practicing that.
Mhm.
I love that. How do I feel? Make someone feel like I'm listening to them? How about actually listen to them? Ask a question.
I tried to rein in the snark,
Oh my
and it was such an
gosh.
interesting moment, right? We can get very heady about it, and this is why there's so much that is common sense, but not necessarily common practice.
Well, I love that too. It's so much common sense, but then not common practice. And how do you close the gap
Mhm.
between the two?
Mhm. Mhm.
I know we're coming to the top of the hour, and before we close, I always love to ask a fun pop culture
Yeah.
question, which is, all right, in the world of Elaine, what are the trendiest things for you? What are you listening to these days, watching, eating, wearing, like
Mm,
whatever in that pop culture world speaks to you right
mm,
now? What is that?
mm. I am not a pop culture person, and I have maintained a low media diet. I was saying at one point,
Nice.
people are like, What are the shows you're watching?" And
Yeah.
Bridgerton, this and that, and I was like, "I am watching reruns of Chopped," because
Nice.
the creativity of how to put things together, it's
Yeah.
an isolated thing. I don't feel like I have to commit to an entire season. Maybe that says more about my commitment issues. And is the food going to make it on the plate? Is about the level of additional drama in my life that I want right now. So I'm exercising that agency. I don't
Yes.
need additional drama or horror films in my life right now. We'll keep it low drama, low
I think,
information.
yeah, but there's something super cool about watching reruns
Yeah.
or content from Chopped and understanding how things are put together and what
Mhm,
actually gets served. That's
mhm.
really super interesting. And that is pop culture, by the way. Like when
I'm
you're
so
looking at
glad I made the
something
cut.
like that. No, you totally did. And then before we wrap, how can
Yeah.
people get a hold of you? Your book is widely available. What's the best way to find
Mhm.
your book and find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram, Elaine Lin Hering. The book is Unlearning Silence: How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully, available in hardback, ebook, audiobook, wherever books are sold.
Amazing. Well, we're going to wrap this culture cast, and I want to thank you for giving us your energy, your perspective, but
Mm,
also helping us think about how do we create a space where people have agency for themselves and give
mm,
that to others by truly listening, and being curious and being open. Um, thank you, thank you, thank you. There's so much to learn from, and that we can immediately practice in
mm.
creating this culture around us just by doing that as a start.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Hopefully, we will see you at the next CultureCast, which will be in a couple of weeks with Michelle Duster. And until then, everyone, scoop up Elaine's book. Cheers, everyone, and happy Thursday. We'll see you all later.
Happy Thursday.
Bye.
Bye.